Guy Kawasaki has written the seminal book, The Art of the Start, and many, many more bestsellers. He's the chief evangelist at Canva. He is a Silicon Valley icon. He is my mentor and has helped me with my career milestones, including at my Google Talk when I released my book. He brought his book for free to try and get more people to get on board with my book. So you are in good hands for this talk coming up. I now give you Guy Kawasaki.
All right, thank you. Yes, so I'm the chief evangelist of Canva. It's an online graphics design service. I'm also Mercedes-Benz brand ambassador. And finally, I'm a podcaster. The name of my podcast is Remarkable People. And today, in the brief time that I have, I'd like to discuss what I call the art of perseverance, how to survive this pandemic. Because lofty things like AI aside, it is a battle for survival right now. And so you have much more visionary and brighter minds talking about AI and that kind of stuff. I'll just talk about survival. So I have a handful, a collection of points and tips that I want to give you. And we'll go from there, okay? So number one, my piece of advice is that you have to put yourself in the right mindset and run the right race. And the right race right now is a marathon. This is not a sprint. It's not 100 meters or 100 yards. It's a marathon. And maybe even more accurate in Olympic metaphors is that it is a decathlon. So you have to run a long time and you have to be good at 10 different events. So the important point I'm trying to make first is understand that this is going to take months and months, if not years and years. There's nothing going to be magic about this fall. And come January, you know, I am extremely doubtful, not that I would know anything inside, but it's hard to believe that there's going to be a magic vaccine in January and all of a sudden things go back to normal. So prepare yourself for a marathon. Step two is that I think you just need to focus on cash, because in this kind of time where there's so many layoffs and there's so a retrenchment of investment and all this kind of stuff, cash is king, queen, prince, and princess. I mean, it is everything. So if I were, for example, a consumer-facing consumer goods product company, I would be thinking, how do I turn inventory into cash, as opposed to, you know, preserving lofty positioning and lofty branding. Case in point, Apple introduced a new iPad a couple months ago, and it's already being discounted at Amazon. So, you know, when's the last time you ever heard of a new iPad being discounted so quickly? So if Apple can do it, or Amazon can do it to Apple, then anybody can. I don't think you need to be worried at all that someday people are going to say, oh, you know, that product isn't that good because it was discounted right out the gate. Well, you know, the the logic should be, I survived, and that's a statement in and of itself. So that's recommendation number two. Recommendation number three, along with that, is you probably have to cut deeper than you think. I think that at the end of this, that it's better to look back and say, wow, I cut people I shouldn't have cut. I lost good people. I lost opportunities. I left money on the table. I'd rather you say that than I should have cut more. I should have simplified my product line more. Instead, I thought that things would turn around, so I kept overhead high and we died. So it's much better to be alive, full of regret, than dead and, well, also full of regret, but gone. Okay? So cut deeper than you think. Number five, excuse me, that's number four. Number four is do not depend on white knights and magical bullets, silver bullets that, you know, thanks to our politicians, you're going to get a magical check that's going to preserve your business, enable you to keep going. Yes, those checks are going out, but I don't know. So far, unless you're the LA Lakers or a large publicly traded restaurant, it doesn't seem you're getting help from the government. So the assumption that oh, I read that there's all these loans and all these grants coming out, so we'll be fine. We'll get one of those. Man, hallelujah if you get it. Don't get me wrong, take it and run, but the assumption that you're going to get it is very, very risky. Number five is the recommendation that you tap your customer. It's got to be that the easiest person to sell to is someone you're already selling to. So perhaps instead of trying to prospect and get new customers, you should milk your installed base right now. Uh, it's kind of a weird metaphor, but yeah, I mean, milk your cash cow. Number six is I would say that, uh, you know, now of all times is the time to be transparent. I could build a case in the rising tide and all boats floating that, if you were having difficulty, you may need to hide that because you would stand out from the crowd as having difficulty. But when everybody's having difficulty, you really you don't need to be transparent, and arguably it's the worst thing to do because it takes so much energy to lie and keep your lie going, and you don't have energy and time to keep lies going. So be transparent. I mean, everybody's having problems. It's not like you're the only company, you're the only outfit that's having problems, and everybody else is going honky dory. So now's the time to be transparent. Uh, Next point is that I think you're going to have to ask the remaining employees to do a lot. And if you're going to ask them to do a lot, then you should also give a lot. And again, I recommended conserving cash. So I think that your currency right now is stock. And, uh, uh, options and grants and stuff are not going to affect your cash balance and your balance sheet. So now's the time to be generous with stock. And, when the economy returns and when things turn better, everybody should profit from that. I mean, it's only fair if they're making sacrifices now. So use stock. Next point is I think you need to evaluate your supply chain. There used to be this assumption that the the cheapest supplier was the best. And if that cheap supplier was 6,000 miles away in China, so be it. We can do things much cheaper in China. Well, that theory is kind of breaking down right now because if your country happens to be in a trade war with China, well, there's going to be unforeseen costs there and unforeseen delays. And then if there's a pandemic, so that the factories are closed or they have different priorities, everybody's making PPE stuff instead of your widget. Boy, that's a lot of risk there. So maybe it's better to have a local supplier and pay slightly more than to try to find a low cost provider 5,000 miles away. So I'm just advocating that you check your supply chain. The next thing I think is now is the time to do business direct. That it's a very tricky thing to depend on multiple tier distribution because you are no longer master of your fate. So imagine you're a company that's been selling through Amazon, and all of a sudden Amazon decides that your product isn't quote essential, and so your product doesn't have priority in sales, marketing, and fulfillment. You're screwed. So I think now is the time to start selling direct. Now you could make the case, well, someday Amazon will be pissed off because we sold direct and we didn't go through them, or your resellers will be pissed off because you didn't go through them. I think that's a risk you need to take because at the end of the day, you need to survive as opposed to maintain this artificial great relationship with your resellers. Take the business direct. Let's see. The number 10 is, let's see. You know, you should do all the crap that you never had time to do before. Uh, Personally, for example, I took a day and I found every cable in my house and every power supply, and I reorganized all that electronic detritus into piles of keep and give away and recycle. That's something I never had time to do before. Believe it or not, I like wash dishes every day, sometimes twice a day. I mop the kitchen floor now. So I'm not I'm not saying you need to become domestic, but I'm saying if there was ever a time to do the stuff you didn't want to do, like establish policies and procedures to, upgrade your website, to digitize things, to fill out all the stuff you shouldn't have, to write your FAQs, to learn some new skills like how to do a video conference, how to make a TikTok movie, how to do good Instagram, TV, how to go live on Facebook and LinkedIn. Now is the time, because while you have this free time, let's face it, most of us are getting a couple hours back every day because we're not commuting. So now's the time to do the crap. And 11, and maybe the most important recommendation, is to ask yourself the question. Oh, I touched my face. But if I had gone to the Mayo Clinic, believe me, I would have had a mask. But anyway, now is the time to ask this question, therefore what? And by this, I mean, take your vision for your industry, understand the just tsunami of changes that are going to happen and are happening, and ask yourself, therefore what? So let's go back to use a more positive example. Let's say that 15 years ago, you figured out, wow, phones are no longer going to be tied to places. They're going to be tied to people. So as phones are for people now, these phones will have cameras, and these phones with cameras will be on the internet so people can upload pictures. Therefore, what? And you would hopefully come to the conclusion, we should do a photo sharing website like Instagram. So I'm asking you to take that same kind of logic, that there's not going to be in-person meetings. People are not going to travel as much. People are going to shop by Instacart because they don't want to go into markets. That learning is going to take place remotely. That's going to create a whole different kind of industry and skill set. That medicine, it's going to be a long time before people say, yeah, why don't I just go to the doctor and sit in the waiting room with everybody else, when some people might have coronavirus sitting right next to you. So all of these kind of things are changing, and in whatever industry you're in, you may see even greater changes. Then ask yourself, well, now that I see this coming, therefore what? What are the opportunities that are inherent with this kind of change? And that's where the innovation will occur. So those are my 11 tactical tips for how to persevere and survive this pandemic. And Molly, just come back and let's see if we have any questions.
Yes, we have questions, always questions for you. One of them is, I'm just going to rattle through them as they come in. What is your next book?
Honestly, I don't think I'll ever write a book again, although I've said that 14 times now. And the reason why is because I have fallen in love with podcasting. So as an author, the way it works is it takes a year to write a book, and then it takes another year for the publisher to publish it. And this is with desktop publishing, imagine before. So maybe I'm exaggerating high. It's not 2 years, it's 18 months. 18 months from beginning to end of a book. When you get that book 18 months later, before it's even shipped, it's probably out of date because you finished it really 9 months before. And so it's out of date, and you get one payment, your advance. Well, it's in 3 tranches, but you get one payment. Odds are you'll never get another dollar because they gave you too much of advance. And so it's this art form where it's locked in place. There's not a stream of payments unless you're one of the few people that exceed your advance. And so that just all sucks. By contrast, a podcast, I podcast 52 times a year. And, I interview Andrew Yang, and 4 days later, I have his podcast out. And so, the turnaround in a podcast can be as short as you like, but, reasonably, it's a week. So I would rather get out a podcast that's topical about, what's happening right now with the pandemic than imagine writing a book about the pandemic now that is going to come out in 18 months. I mean, in 18 months, we may all be dead. Or in 18 months, we may have this totally locked and loaded with a vaccine. So who the hell knows what's going to happen in 18 months? But, well, if I could get Anthony Fauci on a podcast, I would have him out next Wednesday. So there's that, the timeliness. And also, as a podcaster, I could sell sponsorships and ads every week. So 52 times a year, I could collect money as opposed to 3 times for 3 tranches at once for a book. So that's a very long answer to tell you why podcasting is the new publishing.
That is incredible. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs?
Well, I mean, I just gave you 11 pieces of advice. What else do you want? Oh, I think you're muted, Molly.
Sorry about that. I muted myself. Let me put it into more.
Is that self-mutilation?
Let me put it into different terms for you. You gave us really good advice on how to deal with the post-pandemic or the current situation that we're in. But what would you say to someone who is really caught up in all of this and is in a super funk and can't seem to rattle that? Because I've had those conversations with people.
Yeah.
How does one break that state to try and, I mean, I know I'm not saying from a mental health standpoint, but just as a guy who's happy and does a lot to help people on a daily basis and cheer us all up.
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm not a mentor, even though you think I am, and I'm not a life coach. Okay, so I'm not Marcus Welby, MD. Although probably most of your listeners are too young to know who the hell did he just say. I don't know. You know what works for me is this: I just stay busy. So I very sit around ruminating. You know how woeful my life is. Podcasting. The nature of a podcast is it takes about 3 or 4 hours to prep for an interview. It takes an hour to do the interview. It takes about 3 or 4 hours to edit the interview. And then the sound designer comes in and does his pass. And then you get that back again and you have to listen to the whole thing for errors or, you know, any kind of changes you want to make. So there's probably 10 or 12 hours in every podcast. Every week. So that's, you know, a quarter-time job right there. And that's not counting the marketing of the podcast. So anyway, I'm very busy with the podcast. So I basically keep myself busy. And I have 4 children, 2 of which are economically independent to the extent that any child is ever economically independent. So I've had 2 IPOs, but I still have two in the portfolio and they have tuitions. So, you know, I never lose sight of the fact that, you know, guy, you know, forget all this like airy fairy self-actualization, higher stuff, man. You got bills to pay, so just suck it up and make money.
All right. Well, yes, I know. Sometimes it just comes down to brass tacks and etc. Right? We just have to just put our chin up and keep going, no matter what is going on.
I don't care where your chin is, as long as you keep going. I mean, I think that you know, the key to success in life, if you want to get philosophical for a second, it's not how smart you are, how visionary you are, and all that. Although, you know, Steve Jobs clearly proved that that's another path. But I think for most people, what determines success in life is grit. It's just how hard are you willing to work? It's grit. It ain't because you got, you know, 800 on your SATs or 4.2 GPA or you went to Harvard, Dartmouth, Yale, or Stanford. It's pure grit. If you gave me a choice between 2 people, one who's gritty and one who's just book smart, I'd pick the gritty person all day long.
I love that. And you know, grit is something you don't need any money to have. You don't have you can.
I would go further. I would say that grit and money is inversely related. I mean, how much grit do you think that Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner have?
I don't even want to imagine that.
Yeah.
Yes, I hear what you're saying there about grit. Grit is something, those of us that do have it. And I mean, I'll give this event as an example. This event could very well have not have happened,
Hmm.
and yet, here it is. It didn't matter if there was a pandemic, or if we have a supply chain shortage, or if we're going
Hmm.
into a recession, or if we're uncomfortable with leadership, or there was an earthquake in my house and I had damage to my house, even though it was a smaller earthquake, but it was under my house. Like, doesn't matter. We're here, we're making it happen, and we have Guy Kawasaki, and we're so grateful for spending time. And I think we all need to get our grit groove on as best we can. And I think we need to remember, Guy, right? We are not alone. We have collaborations, we have
Hmm.
communities like AI Showbiz, where we can make this type of thing happen.
I
And
also, this is a tricky thing whenever I say this, but we also have to remember like the long historical picture, right? So, um, in one sense, our sacrifice right now is, we can't socialize, bars are closed, there's no sporting events, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, for the good of society, we're being asked to stay at home and watch Netflix and Hulu. So I've watched 3 seasons of Ozark in the last month. Okay, so that's kind of the sacrifice. But by contrast, in World War II, the U.S. government made Japanese Americans go live in the desert in a camp under armed guards, and and even that's not nearly as bad as the Holocaust. Think of the people in Syria. So let's just put and think of all the refugees who are trying to start a life in Europe, having swum across the Mediterranean. So let us remember the bigger picture here. I'm not trying to say that it's easy, and but there are people who have it much worse than we do. Um, but I have to say that I got to tell you, one of my pet peeves these days is I watch these billionaires, and they're saying, yes, we need to reopen the economy. We need to get America back to work. And by that, they mean that not that the people doing those tasks are essential, but the tasks are essential. The task, not the person. And so, yeah, I mean, they're like all for opening up, and, let's have clerks working in markets, and let's have, people work baristas at Safeway, and, let's get my life back to normal. Well, I'll tell you what, whenever you hear someone rich saying we need to open up this economy and get back to work, ask them if they would let their kid work in Safeway or Starbucks right now. Just ask them that, and let's see what they say.
yeah, yeah, it is an interesting time, Guy, no doubt, and one that I could have never quite imagined.
Yeah.
And it kind of rolled in. It started. We heard the news, and it just kept rolling in, and like a wave, gaining force. Where suddenly, I'm here in LA, and we're supposed to stay indoors right now. So we are all doing our part, and I salute everyone. And wherever you are, whatever circumstance you are, we do have our grit, and we will get through this together. And we are a
We
community.
shall.
We
and
shall.
and I think um, someday we'll look back and we'll say, yes, there was a lot of tragedy, a lot of pain, a lot of all that, but not that we planned it this way, but there will be good things that come of this. Adoption of technologies, changes, people realizing that maybe they don't need to drive 2 hours a day. Companies realizing that. Uh, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, that's part of the therefore what plan, right? But uh, I don't, the great wars and the great pandemics at some point, because of human resourcefulness, some good came out of them also.
You Guy, thank you so much for your time today. And if there is silver linings in everything, you've given us an inspiration. Thank you so much. Thank
You're
you very, very much. And thank you for going through life with me, Guy. I really appreciate it.